Hello and welcome to Overwatch Orisa Impressions. In this video I'm going to go over the new hero that Blizzard is testing out on the PTR, a tank named Orisa, and talking about my experiences with her this afternoon and some speculation on what she could be in the new competitive scene. So some background information. Orisa is a large four-legged robot built by a child genius to protect the people of Numbani. In terms of gameplay, Blizzard has said that she's a new anchor tank, kind of like Reinhardt is. She has 200 health plus 200 armor, which means she has slightly less total health than Reinhardt, but is the same as Zarya if you replaced her shields with armor. Her move speed is the same as most heroes, but is actually about half of the normal speed when she's firing her primary weapon. However, I found that you can jump shoot, where you jump and alternate shooting, to go at full movement speed, not that this is terribly useful. Another fun fact is that she can actually crouch, unlike D.Va, but like all the other heroes. Now into her weapons and abilities. Orisa's primary weapon is her fusion driver, which is kind of like a projectile chain gun. It does 12 damage per shot at 12 shots per second, and does not seem to have any damage fall off. Up close, this damage per second is almost identical to D.Va. Something interesting to note is that her primary weapon always has the same spread, kind of like Bastion after the most recent patch. Her primary weapon is never perfectly accurate, but at the same time it does not get less accurate as you fire. So this just means that it's always not very useful at far range. It's important to remember that her primary weapon is a projectile. It is not hit scan like Soldier's weapon, but it does travel a bit faster than, say, Mercy or D.Va's pistol, so it's somewhat in between. I found when I was playing as Orisa that she has trouble with her primary weapon beating an armored enemy who's being healed by Mercy. I found that even when I was fighting an enemy Orisa up close and they weren't fighting back, I wasn't able to kill them simply because their Mercy out-healed my damage. I did, however, find that if you can consistently get headshots up close on an enemy, then you can do enough damage to take down most people pretty quickly, similar to how D.Va can do this in close quarters. One of Orisa's abilities is called Fortify, which halves incoming damage to you for 4 seconds, which is the same damage reduction as Nano Boost, and also prevents you from being moved or obstructed by abilities like Earth Shatter. Now, the most important ability that Orisa has, or at least her most obvious one, is her Protective Barrier. This is a 900 hit point shield that she can shoot out once every 12 seconds. If you shoot a barrier before the round starts and wait for the cooldown to expire, you can effectively double up the barrier by redeploying it right as it's destroyed for about 1800 points of damage, which is almost as much damage as Reinhardt's shield can stop. So you kind of have a similar first defense against the enemy attackers. The barrier does decay eventually, meaning it doesn't last forever, but it seems to be more than about 20 seconds, so in practice the barrier can stick around long after you're gone. It also stays alive after you die, which is nice. Another nice thing about the barrier is that it curves up at the top, meaning you're slightly protected from above, which will stop, for instance, McCree from flashbanging you over the top. Orisa's right-click ability, called Halt, is kind of like a mini Graviton Surge from Zarya. So you shoot out this projectile, and then if you right-click, or if the projectile, which moves in a straight line, hits a wall, then it pulls all enemies within 8 meters towards it, and then stalls them for a fraction of a second. I found that Halt does not penetrate shields, meaning you're not able to pull people out from behind Reinhardt's shield, or even move Reinhardt or any other enemy if they're behind a barrier. I found that you can pull off enemies from walkways, although it is tricky to get the timing right, so in places like the second point of Hanamura, this could be a nice way to slow down the oncoming attackers. Orisa's ultimate ability, called Supercharger, is to put down a 200 hit point object that gives all the teammates within a certain radius and with line of sight a 50%, that's 50% damage boost, which is the same as a damage boost you get from Nano Boost. For comparison, Mercy's damage boost is only 30%. This Supercharger ult lasts 15 seconds and has a pretty big radius, so if you put it in a position where the enemies can't see it, but all your teammates have line of sight to it, it can help you fend off the enemies for quite a while. To compare some of Orisa's abilities to Nano Boost, since there are some damage reduction and damage increase comparisons, Orisa's Fortify ability does the same 50% damage reduction as Nano Boost, but only lasts for 4 seconds instead of 8. But her Supercharger ult gives her team the 50% damage increase that Nano Boost does, but for 15 seconds instead of 8. Now I'm going to speculate a bit on what the role of Orisa could be in competitive play. Blizzard has definitely designed Orisa as an anchor tank, mainly an alternative to Reinhardt, to try and mix up the meta so that Reinhardt's not as singularly essential. And so I think that we will be seeing Orisa as an alternative to Reinhardt, but I think it's very unlikely you'd have both on the same team, since that'd be a little bit redundant. Now, compared to Reinhardt, the biggest thing that we want to look at is their shields. Reinhardt's shield recharges at just under 200 points per second, but Orisa's barrier recharges at about 75 points per second, if you consider that you get 900 points of defense every 12 seconds. However, if you consider the fact that Orisa can be recharging her shield as she's using her shield, whereas Reinhardt needs to take his shield down in order to recharge it, I think that they work out to a similar rate, since you could effectively double Orisa's shield recharge rate to about 150 points per second, which gets it very close to the ballpark of Reinhardt's about 200 points per second. When I was playing Orisa, I found that her shield ends up being used a lot more like Winston's shield, because you'll want to make sure to keep the enemies on the other side of it from you, so you'll kind of go back and forth or try and lure them toward your shield and then run away once they get past it. Based on Orisa's barrier, I found that she is better suited for defense than for offense, whereas Reinhardt seems to function pretty well in both roles. For instance, if you speed boost Reinhardt, that's a great way to get a shield moving up with your team, but if you speed boost Orisa, I'm not quite sure what that gets you. It's also unclear to me whether Orisa is better against flankers than Reinhardt. For instance, Reinhardt is a pretty good way to defend your healers from a Genji, since you can melee him a couple times to get him out of the way, but since Orisa shoots projectiles, she would be countered by Genji's deflect, so I'm not sure if she'd be able to take care of them as well. At close range, Orisa's damage output seems comparable to D.Va, so that's just where you should set your expectations. Not a super high damage DPS, but she has a very large magazine with her primary fire, so she can do something to suppress the enemies, or perhaps most importantly, help take down the enemy barrier, kind of like a Bastion would, which might change the balance in her favor in a shield war with the Reinhardt. Some disadvantages that Orisa has to Reinhardt is that she can't turn around, as Reinhardt might occasionally need to do if there's a flanker, and more importantly, Orisa can't move with her shield and cannot reactively block enemy attacks. Whereas Reinhardt can throw up his shield with a simple right-click instantaneously, Orisa has to shoot down her shield, which takes about a quarter of a second or so, which means that it is too slow to block an incoming Earth Shatter, or to block, say, an incoming Hook or Sleep Dart, which I found can be great uses for Reinhardt's shield at the last second. So, overall, I think that Orisa is a really interesting hero. I'm really glad that we have some options now as far as the main tanks, and I look forward to seeing how she's played in competitive. I think that we'll definitely be seeing some more variety in the meta as people consider Orisa instead of Reinhardt, but I'm sure she'll have some counters and some heroes that she's good against, which we'll only be able to see once the meta evolves and we get her in our hands after she's finished her time on the PTR and comes to the rest of us. This does it for our overview and initial impressions of Orisa. Consider subscribing for more Overwatch updates and competitive commentary. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.